there's this video of a patient who has a very severe type of aphasia, so this language disorder due to a stroke. And he's having a conversation, and so the person asks him a question like, "Oh, so whatever are your children?" And then he's saying, "Tono, tono, 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 tono," because that's the only word he can say. But there's like prosody is intact. He's really having a whole conversation only saying tono, 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 tono. And then the person asks him like, "How many children do you have?" And then he shows 4. And then she says, "Can you count that up for me?" And he's like, "Tono, tono, tono, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, tono, 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 tono." And every time I show that video to students, everyone is like, "What is that?" And it's really this thing, like, 1 to 10, we've done that so many times. We know that so well.
Yeah.
You're probably not having to do that from, it's just a learned thing really that you can produce. But once you get to the 12, that is a bit harder maybe. Like it's not as overlearned. He gets stuck and goes back to his kind of stereotypical production.
Right.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
But then thinking about what you just said, just from a language processing perspective, if we break it down into just language production, it has nothing to do with his motor skills of being able to produce those sounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he can move his mouth. He can produce all of the sounds. Yeah.
So there are no, let's say with a speaking apparatus, there are no impairments there.
Right.
But so then it's, correct me if I'm wrong, right? I'm just trying to reverse engineer this now. So then it would be, well, I mean, he also understands what he's being asked.
Right, most of the time, yeah.
Okay, so it's also not a comprehension problem.
No, in many cases it's not really. So they do comprehend for some more complex types of constructions, they show some deficits, but otherwise it's really comprehension is pretty much intact. It's really producing words, really. It's about, so it's not the motor parts of it, but really getting something, going from a concept to a particular label, being able to have the sounds of how you should sound that. That's where it goes wrong.
Whoa.
Yeah.
But okay. Well, hold on. That means, though, he does know the words themselves. I mean, if he's able to understand you, also saying, how many children do you have? He has access to, let's just call it the lexicon of the language. You call lexicon, the corpus.
Lexicon.
Yeah, lexicon is also fine. Okay. So if I make vocabulary mistake, please correct me. So he has access to that, but now it's literally just the linking of the word he knows in the lexicon to the motor. No.
Well, so it can be at various levels, or not various, not many, but there's one first step. Let's say you go from a concept to a particular abstract word. It's not yet the word as we would produce it in terms of how it sounds. So it's a more abstract thing that's very far removed from a motor program. So that's the first step. You have to go from a concept to that particular abstract representation. That's at least what theories assume. And it can be already at that point that it goes wrong, right? That the concept is intact, but you can't get to a particular label for it. And then there's a second step, which is going from this label to putting it into what we call the word form or a phonological representation, something that has sound to it. So it's not yet motor commands, but it has information about what the sounds are in that word.
Yeah.
That's another step where we know it can go wrong, that they do have an abstract word, but they can't exactly have this, they don't have access to the sounds of that word. If you ask these people, is it cup? So they can't find, microphone. They can't find the word for microphone at that point. sometimes if you give them the option, you say, is it table that you're trying to say? They will say no. Is it, cup? No. Is it microphone? Yes. Right? So they do know, they do have the knowledge about that word, but once they have to produce that themselves, they for some reason cannot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it can be then the process from the concept to the label, or label to the word form. Yeah. Or word form to the actual physical production of that sound, which they don't have problems with.
Right, yeah, exactly. Then it's usually, you usually see it, I think, in other cases. But then it's really more of a motor thing, right? So you really notice in the way that it's being produced that it's either inconsistently produced over multiple utterances. So if you would say microphone throughout the day a couple of times, every time the hour would be somewhere else in the articulators. Or it's a general problem with particular articulators. So you find, that all of sounds that require a certain strength of that particular muscle, that they are all showing that type of deficit. Mm-hmm. But these are more of the motor types of deficits. They're not exactly seen as more of these, let's say, more truly language. I don't like that term so much. But, if you would see producing words from a more motor perspective, or a more psycholinguistics, or more, retrieving things from memory, then some of the deficits will really be way more on the motor side of things. And these people who cannot easily find words, it's usually not at the motor level, but really more at the deeper level, going from representations in memory, or going from a concept to a label to a sound. And
when it comes to the concepts that you now talked about, is the source for knowing these concepts for language comprehension the same as for language production?
Yeah, I think that's something that is not debated. The concepts themselves, they are regardless if you're using them to produce yourself, or if you're hearing a word and going to the meaning of that word. Yeah.
I mean, if we look at the brain as being hopefully as efficient as it can be, why store something twice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Right? And otherwise, also patients suffering from brain damage should then also show similar, not similar, but very particular differentiation with their performance, if that was the case.
Right.
Yeah.
Whoa. And you do see in cases of what's called semantic dementia, right? That
what is that?
So it is a type of dementia, but it particularly affects like conceptual knowledge. So people will, over time, they will lose information about concepts. And that holds if they now produce or comprehend words, or even if you give them, objects that they don't need any word, they don't need to use any language for, they will still show deficits in understanding what an animal is, for example. So everything at some point becomes a cat or an animal. If in their drawings, you can see that they are losing knowledge about the concepts themselves rather than just the labels.
And does it, that's interesting. And does that semantic dementia move upward hierarchy? So for example, what I mean is, so you have a cat, and then you have, mammal, animal, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It becomes more prototypical. I'm not sure because I think a mammal is still and even a less used level in the hierarchy that, like, we don't talk about so often mammals as such, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So I think if you start generalizing, I'm not so familiar with the behavior of these patients, but I think when there's generalization, there's either it goes towards prototypicality, so everything becomes a dog because it's more prototypical, or everything becomes an animal because it's a higher level label. But I don't think you wouldn't move up and say this is an eukaryote or something, right? I don't think that.
And prototypical is also then, I guess, patient specific. I'm sure there is some general prototypical aspects. But if you're, for example, a patient that's a scientist,
right? Yeah.
Is that possible?
I don't know. I do think that familiarity with certain things would shape what remains intact, right?
Yeah.
So I do think that's the case. I'm just not very familiar with reports about that. I had to remember of this case. It was an aphasia, so someone with a language disorder due to a stroke. He was an accountant before the stroke. And I was observing his behavior, and he was reading aloud text. This happened over multiple occasions. Almost every time he read aloud a number, even though it was just, he's reading text that says, in that house there are 3 people. When he would read the 3, he would say $3 million. He would always add $1 million or $1,000. He would always add $1,000 to it. So he would say, like, in that house there are $3,000 people. And I thought that was just so amazing because, for him, numbers, probably from his profession, numbers do come together quite a lot with $1,000 attached to it, right? So for him, that's a way more familiar, way more frequent type of utterance than it is for me.
Yeah.
So I do think that you probably find these biases in their behavior as well, that, familiarity does, or the frequency of certain things are also person dependent. That you would find that being reflected in their behavior for sure.
Well, that's crazy. Well, it would be nice to have $300,000.
Exactly, right? If you're always talking in the thousands, you're doing very well.
Exactly. You're doing very well. You definitely have the right clientele. Let's say that.